Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I'm your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we're going to stick with our football theme, only this time we're going to be talking about sprint football. Our guest will be someone with over 30 years of coaching experience, including more than a few coaching his sons. I'll also share a few thoughts that Coach Ken Niumatalolo had about the first 2 weeks of practice following the team's return from summer break, and we'll also take a look at our question of the day. It's T-minus 19 days and counting until Navy's first game of the year against Delaware, so stay with us. We've got a lot of ground to cover. All right, how's it going, everybody? Really glad you could join us today for another edition of Navy Sports Central. Getting close to crunch time with regard to the Mids getting ready for the first game of the season. And I had a chance to catch some comments from Coach Niumatalolo from his talk with the media that took place on Friday, August 12th. It sounds like things are tracking pretty well, actually. He specifically mentioned Ty Lavatai's leadership on the field and his overall command of the offense as he continues to demonstrate on a daily basis out there. Coach Ken also shared that he's very excited about the defense now that last year's younger players have had a solid year's worth of experience under their belt. They have an even stronger understanding of Coach Newberry's system, and they're playing with a lot of aggressiveness, too. And to tell you the truth, I'm just as fired up about seeing what the defense can do this season as I am about the offense. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Navy's first opponent this year is the Delaware Blue Hens. They are an FCS team from the Colonial Athletic Conference, and they do have a history with the Mids. In fact, they've played a total of 17 times with Navy holding a 10-7 advantage. But that's only because of a 3-game winning streak. Delaware actually knocked them off a couple of times in the early 2000s. Now, the last time the two teams played was in 2013 when Keenan Reynolds led the Mids to an easy 51-7 win. Delaware is usually a pretty good bet to make the FCS playoffs every year, but they went just 5-6 last year and will begin this season with a new head coach. That guy is Ryan McCarty, a former Blue Hens quarterback who led the team to an FCS national championship in 2003. And that also happened to be one of the years they beat Navy. This year, Delaware should have a pretty decent team. They're ranked 19th in their preseason poll, and it turns out their newest assistant coach on offense is Tom Flacco, who is Joe Flacco's younger brother. There's no way that Navy's taking this team for granted, though. The overall series proves that the Blue Hens are no pushovers, and after getting beaten pretty convincingly in the opening game of the season the last 2 years, I know the Mids are really looking to get things started on the right foot. Kickoff is at noon Eastern Time on September 3rd at Navy Marine Corps Stadium. Okay, that gets you guys all caught up on how things are shaping up with the football team. Coming up next, we'll learn a little bit more about the sprint football program and one of their offensive linemen who helped lead them to the College Sprint Football League Championship last year. So don't go anywhere. Okay, it is time for our deep dive segment. Today we're going to get to know one of the offensive linemen on the sprint football team through his dad's eyes. Our guest has coached a number of sports over the last 3 decades, including football, track, and lacrosse. He can also give us some great insight into the Navy sprint football program. Please welcome Jim Kenneally, the father of Navy offensive lineman Ryan Kenneally, to Navy Sports Central. All right, Jim, thanks for joining us today on the podcast. We're really glad to have you with us.
Well, I really appreciate you asking me to come on and talk about being a parent of a Navy athlete. Carl, we certainly appreciate all you do to support Navy athletics and all the sports that are happening there at the Academy.
Yeah, and it's a lot of fun, so thanks for that. Before we get into our conversation, though, about Ryan, I was wondering if you could kind of share with us a little information about yourself. My wife happens to be from Chicago, so I'm fairly familiar with the area. You are from Elmhurst, Illinois. Where exactly is that?
Elmhurst is a suburb 20 miles directly west of the city. If you took a pin and you put it in the center and drew a line straight for 20 miles, you'd be right where Elmhurst, Illinois is. Mm-hmm. It is, in fact, I'm looking out my window right now. I can see Sears Tower from my window, even 20 miles away.
Oh, wow.
Right along one of the train tracks here in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs. Mm-hmm. Before that, I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, northeast Ohio, in between Pittsburgh and Cleveland, so I'd like to say that some of the grittiness and toughness and the blue-collar traits that my boys have come from my upbringing in Youngstown.
Yeah, and I know Ohio is kind of a big football state anyway, but Youngstown in particular sticks in my mind for one reason or another. I'm not really sure why. Are there any, big-time high school programs in Youngstown, or am I thinking about something else?
Well, it used to be there were three. Cincinnati Moeller was one, Massillon was another, and Youngstown Cardinal Mooney was the third. I actually went to Cardinal Mooney High School, but now when you think of Youngstown, you think about college football coaches.
Right.
I actually played with Bo Pelini, the Stoops brothers, Bobby Stoops, Mark Stoops, now at the University of Kentucky, Mike Stoops, who I believe was at Oklahoma, and he may be at Kentucky now with his brother. We all played football together, and we actually played for the Stoops brothers' father, who was a great mentor to me and a role model growing up as well as my father. So, in Youngstown, you either got in trouble or you played football, and once you played football, you actually coached football. So,
yeah, that's pretty good. So, when you're not watching your son play on the Sprint football team, what kind of stuff do you do in your spare time?
Usually I'm watching film of him practicing or doing something with Sprint football. I've been a coach for 30 years, coached a number of sports, high school football here in Illinois. I was fortunate to be a coach on the staff of 4 state champions, of which 3 of them were with all 3 of my sons, which was very special. But coaching is my hobby. I don't play golf. I have a very terrible golf game. I try to work out every once in a while. But if I have an opportunity to watch film or work out, I'm going to watch film every time.
Right. Yeah, I have an 18-year-old son, and he was a basketball player, and he's in college now. He doesn't play anymore, but he had a really nice run in junior high and high school and everything, and he loved playing. And for a short time when he was playing in different leagues, I was actually had the pleasure of coaching him as well. So can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, what is it like coaching your sons and trying to strike that balance between being coach and dad in the face of all the other folks on the team?
So I started early, and I had always been coaching, so the boys were around me as a coach from the time they were a young age. The first state championship that I coached, the boys were actually 8, 6, and 4. And they had always been around the team, and they had seen me as a coach. And as they started to get older, and I would watch them play youth sports, but not as a coach, as a father, and just encouraging them to do their best. But there got to be a point in time where there is that intersection of coach and father, and you have to have a discussion about what they want to accomplish as a student athlete. And typically for me, it was their 8th grade year going into high school. And the question would be, tell me what type of athlete you want to be. Do you want to be a great athlete? Do you want to be a great player? Or do you just want to play? Because there's 2 different roads you can take there. And depending upon their answer, that really drove my mentoring of them in terms of high school, what they were doing in high school, how they were to prepare. I'd say the biggest thing that they learned from me, just from a coaching perspective, is that all the preparation that you have to do before the actual event and before the actual season is vastly different when you're a high school athlete now.
Right.
We want kids to play. We want them to enjoy sports. But once you start to get into high school, really how you are driven and what you want to accomplish is based on what you do in the off season.
Right.
So I told them right before their freshman year, listen, I've got the roadmap for you. If you want to be a great athlete, or if you want to be a good player and you want to give everything that you have, I can give you that roadmap, but I can't drive the car for you.
Right.
You have to drive it. And I would say Jimmy and Ryan and Declan, my third, they all did a very good job of understanding what they wanted. And if they didn't understand, being able to ask those questions. And that's where you answer the question both as a coach and as a parent. I will tell you, when we were on the field, I was the coach. But my most enjoyable moments of coaching, quite frankly, were the car rides home from practice.
Right.
From a game.
Yeah.
Because we leave everything in the locker room, and we have the opportunity to just talk about what else is going on in their life and how they're doing. And it was very, very important for both Maureen and I that I separate being a parent and a coach. And I think I did a pretty good job of it.
Yeah, that's one thing I worked really hard at as well with my son Ethan, and I know that especially when I was coaching him, we always had this thing where if it was kind of a rough game, I never said anything about the game for at least a couple of hours. Just would let it go, just let him deal with it or whatever. But if it was a particularly good game, especially if we had if we knocked off a team that we weren't supposed to beat, then as soon as we got in the car, I just start celebrating like crazy. So it was pretty fun. But I really enjoyed coaching him. He was he was somebody who just he wanted to win more than anything else, and he would do whatever it took. And it was just fun to watch him develop. So that's going to lead me to another question as it relates to your son's early development in football. By the way, did they play any other sports besides football?
They all played lacrosse. They all played baseball as youths, and then a couple of them wrestled a little bit,
right,
but not much.
Right.
But we encouraged them to play every sport that they could. They really enjoyed lacrosse.
Yeah. That's one thing I was trying to get Ethan hooked on as well. But out here in Arizona, they didn't have a lot of lacrosse going on because it was just so hot. So people just be dying out here.
Well, you should come to Chicago because, as I said, coaching is my hobby. I actually coached the high school lacrosse team for the first time this spring.
Uh-huh.
And the running joke was that you didn't need to look at any weather app that you had on your phone. All you had to do was look at our schedule and say, if we had a game, it was going to be 40 and rainy. It was that type of season.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so the question I had was thinking back when they were little. Can you talk about, and we'll just go with Ryan here since he's the one that's still at the academy, but the first time, whether it was football, football or even lacrosse, like the first time he scored a touchdown or made a play that just stuck out in your mind, a goal in lacrosse, whatever, and just kind of talk a little bit about that. And the reason I'm asking you that is because I remember the day that Ethan scored his first basket as a 4-year-old on the little 7-foot hoops with a little ball that's barely bigger than the palm of your hand.
Oh, yeah.
And he struggled so hard because at the beginning of that season, he wasn't even strong enough to get the ball up to the rim. And all throughout the season, which is only like 7 games, but he got stronger and stronger every time. And then the coach said to when we were playing like in our last game of the season, and this is like non-competitive at the time, so his coach walks up to the other coach and he says, "Hey, I got this little guy here who is really, really close to scoring his first basket by himself. So I was wondering if you can kind of give him some space whenever we get the ball." And the guy goes, "Yeah, sure." So first time that we get the ball, the other coach asked his players to kind of like clear out and let Ethan shoot. And he stood there and he gathered himself just like I taught him. He bent his knees. He pushed the ball up and the ball landed on top of the rim and teetered there for about a second before it finally tumbled in. I was standing on the sidelines and I swear I must have jumped 3 feet in the air because I was so excited.
That's the best feeling as a coach.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, especially when you coach youth and you watch the development. Everyone's development is different, right? I'm just going to kind of veer for a second and tell you a story. I was actually coaching grade school track, and we had a kid who he was a distance runner, but he was very slow. And as a track coach, we watched every time you broke your personal best by 3 seconds. It didn't matter if they finished last by a lap and a half. We always had something positive for him our athletes to kind of hang on to, right? Well, it came down to the championship meet, and we had an event it was an open event, and if you qualified in any other event, you could qualify, and that was great. But then if you didn't qualify for anything, you could be in this open event. So this young man did not qualify for anything. So we put him in the open 600 meters. And so it was a particularly hot day, and he ran as hard as he could, and he ended up finishing second in the open. And the open event was worth, if you won, you got 2 points, and if you finished second, you got 1 point. Well, for the whole school, all day long, we ended up winning that meet by 1 point.
Oh, is that right?
So that particular person's 1 point won the whole suburban meet for us. So I love hearing stories about individuals that struggle and are working and have the opportunity to be successful because it drives them. I see the young man and he still says, 1 point, coach, 1 point. So it's great. Yeah. But I guess to answer your question about Ryan, we unfortunately we have a house full of offensive linemen.
Right.
So there was no scoring. There was no, goals in lacrosse because they played defense. But I would say the one time, what made me really see that Ryan had an opportunity to be a special football player actually was his sophomore year in high school. Mm-hmm. We had a very good team that was coming off a state semifinal loss to a team from about 60 miles south here of Chicago. And we were playing that same team in the opening game. And they had an offensive tackle who ended up going to Minnesota, I think either Minnesota or Western Michigan, one of the two. He was probably 6'5", 285 pounds.
Okay.
And my kids were, Jimmy, my oldest, was 6'1". Ryan, at the time, was a sophomore, probably 5'11", maybe 205 pounds. Mm-hmm. And so we started the game, and, of course, they're moving this big kid around, and we're like, okay, what are we going to do? We had an offensive lineman that was in. Ryan was not starting. We had an offensive lineman that was in and playing guard, and the defensive man was playing a 3 technique on his outside shoulder, mm-hmm. and our guard just could not handle him. So we're like, Rhino, that's how you know. That's what we call him, Rhino. Mm-hmm. Rhino, you're in. And we put Rhino in the game. And we're like, oh man, let's just hold on here. We'll get this other guard some rest. We'll teach him up, and then we'll get Ryan out and just keep moving ahead. Mm-hmm. I'm telling you, we put him in there, and the next thing you know, the lineman is throwing Ryan around, getting 2 personal foul penalties, and Ryan is completely in this kid's face. And we're like, let's leave him in. We just got 30 yards on penalties, so let's leave him in. And we're like, we don't have to double team this kid now. Now we don't have to double him. Uh-huh. Ryan was so low and inside and just using his technique and using his hands and totally frustrated this kid that, Carl, by the middle of the second quarter, the kid had given up.
Is that right?
He had given up. There was a play. We're watching the play from the end zone view, and the ball was on about the 4-yard line, and Ryan's driving him, and he's driving this big kid literally all the way back to the back of the end zone. This kid did not want to play anymore. Oh, kid ended up going to Michigan, right? Or not Michigan, Minnesota, I think, and playing. So, his tenacity and grittiness and his ability to apply leverage and win no matter what. Ryan is not happy unless you're on the ground.
Right.
Like on the ground. Mm-hmm. And when I mean on the ground, I mean on your back.
Exactly. And
that's
tell you,
what makes him so tenacious.
And when I watch games, and I pay particular attention to the offensive line. Now I realize in the type of offense that the varsity team uses, the big Coach Ken's guys use, there's not a lot of opportunity for like pancake type of blocks or anything like that because it's a lot of cut blocking and so forth. But what I do look for is just textbook blocks, whether they're cut blocks, whether they're any other kind of block that spring the ball carrier for some decent yardage. And a lot of times when I'm breaking down a game, I will basically say, hey, look, what you saw was the 40 or 50-yard run that Malcolm Perry just got, or whoever's running. But guess what? That was happening because of this block that was thrown right here. So those are the kinds of things I definitely look for sure.
We look for hands, mm-hmm. and the hands especially. Well, so in Coach Ken's offense, hands go. You look for hands to go down, mm-hmm. right? If the hands are going down, that means their hands are not available to grab someone and make a tackle.
Right.
That's why the cut block is so effective in that offense. Mm-hmm. In a zone offense, you look for hands both from the offensive side, their hands inside and on the chest plate and then driving, and then the hands of the defense or the linebackers going up. Mm-hmm. As long as they're not going out or somewhere where they can control the offensive lineman. So you look for hands up or hands down. That's typically how you know you have a good block.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk a little bit about the differences between sprint football and what they're doing at the Division I level. On its face, it looks like the same game, right? I mean, there's the same rules. So what would you and Ryan have to say about the differences between sprint football and what we see every Saturday?
So first, let's take a step back before we even talk about the game on the field, right? When I compare sprint football to the big team at Navy, right? All the coaches at Navy are permanent coaches on the big team, right? For the sprint football, it's actually Marine billet. So it's either Marine captain or Marine major that is there for 3 years. So there's turnover of staff usually every 3 years. I mean, Coach McNeil's been there for a long time on the defensive staff, so he's been pretty permanent. But other than that, every year the positions will probably have a different coach. Usually they come from the TAD environment where somebody's waiting for their permanent placement. So, Jim, as an example, Ryan had Billy Honecker, who was captain on the big team, as his offensive line coach last year. So you have to be able to adapt and learn. So the offense literally may change from year to year. But I would say if you were to categorize Navy sprint football and their offense, it's much more like what the standard college offense is doing right now. A lot of zone, a lot of power where you block down and you pull people around, and then the RPO off of it is pretty standard. And the reason why they have to do that is because the game is fast. It's a lot faster. I don't want to say it's fast. It's not faster speed-wise, but, you think about when you've got on Coach Ken's offense, when they make a pitch and the running back's running down the field, it's very rare that you see a defensive tackle run him down and make a tackle. Yeah. That's not that rare in sprint football.
Yeah, you're right.
It's not that rare because you've got a kid who may have been a running back or a linebacker that wanted to play at the collegiate level and has the opportunity to play sprint. And a lot of the colleges in the sprint league, they actually recruit these kids to come in and play defensive tackle or linebacker. The old adage of Jimmy Johnson where he had safeties play linebacker and linebackers play defensive line. Well, in sprint football, it could be safeties playing defensive tackle or defensive end for sure, and it's just so much faster. So you've got to be able to spread people out and get the ball out quickly. I would say where teams have the advantage in sprint football is if you have a very good offensive line. That's why Army does very well. That's why Navy does very well. They've got kids that are physical. Navy actually tries to get, if kids have wrestled, because it's a leverage situation, and I think Army does the same thing. But to try to get offensive linemen to play that's usually the toughest position to fill in sprint football. Right,
yeah. So that was a nice job describing the differences between the two. When it comes to is it the speed itself that you guys like the most about it in terms of when we talk about the speed? I always look at it as speed per player, right? Because you'll have the Division I game is very, very fast, obviously, but not across every position like you described. Is that what the most unique thing is about sprint football compared to the standard Division I brand that we see?
Yeah, I'd say that, and the need to weigh in 2 or 3 twice a week, and weigh in at 178 is tough.
Yeah.
So if I always talk of it as a cross between wrestling and regular football.
Yeah.
But it is, I would say, the speed and like I said, having to cut weight. When Ryan played his senior year of high school football, he weighed 225 pounds. And now he has to weigh in at 178 for, 8 weeks out of the year. And usually his walking around weight is somewhere between 190, 195. So it takes a tremendous amount of discipline to be able to do that.
Oh, for sure. Okay. So, if he was not playing football, do you figure he'd be playing lacrosse?
I think if not lacrosse, believe it or not, I think he would probably be playing rugby. He likes the physical.
Oh, yeah.
So, without even thinking about it, when you sent me the questions, I'm like, what would he be doing besides getting in trouble? And I said, no, probably rugby.
Yeah.
Probably rugby he would be playing. In fact, my youngest, Declan, he's off to school here in August, and he's going to a school that doesn't have football, so he's gonna play rugby.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So I think you kind of touched on it a little bit, but what is it one personality trait that Ryan has that most reminds you of you? In other words, if all the folks that are close to your family, they see him and whether it's something he says, does, a mannerism or whatever, they'll just point and say, yeah, that's definitely Jim's kid. What would it be?
I would say his grittiness, toughness. He's not going to back down from a fight. Mm-hmm. Will do what it takes in order for the team to be successful.
Right.
He is a team player first, and it kind of comes with the territory when you're an offensive lineman. All of my kids were offensive linemen, so they know how to toil in anonymity. But I will tell you, they will be the first guy lifting the running back up when the running back scores a touchdown.
Right,
There's a great picture of Ryan's second state championship where we had a very, very good running back, and kid scored on a 40-yard run, and the first person there was Ryan lifting him up in the air. I mean, his ability to do whatever it takes to get the job done in order for the team to be successful, and his grittiness, I would say that's the number one trait.
Right. Got it. Okay. Good stuff. So I guess along that same track, when you have a situation where I was wondering if you kind of share, and this is both as a parent and a coach, some of the things you consistently shared with him. You kind of talked about the fact that you can give them a roadmap to be successful once they get into high school. But speaking specifically to especially when they might have had just kind of a rough outing, a rough game or whatever, what are some of the things you would consistently remind them of just to kind of get them to put that behind them and get them back on track?
So two things. And I actually broke this question down in two ways. You can have, as a parent of an athlete, you can have bad practice days, mm-hmm. right? You can have bad practice days and you can have bad game days. So when you're having bad practice days, what they would constantly hear from me is focus on your fundamentals. What you will hear any coach say, and that's kind of the advantage of being a parent and a coach, is, okay, you're telling me you had a bad day. I'm going to tell you how to fix it first. Focus on your fundamentals. Where are your hands? Where are your first three steps? We every year we would go through the same thing, literally the first day of stance, start, first three steps, where are your hands? And if you just focus on those three things, you can fix anything that's going wrong. Mm-hmm. And what it does is it slows everything down.
Yeah.
Oh, man, this kid's getting around me. Why is that? Well, because I'm not stepping with my right foot. I'm stepping incorrectly. Mm-hmm. So let me fix my stance. Let me get a little more balance so I can get a better step. Other than that, we would tell them, I'd say, focus on your fundamentals and throw the day away. It's okay to have bad days. Mm-hmm. You're going to have bad days. But what did you learn from your bad day in order to move forward and be better the next day?
Right.
So that's kind of the practice state. Mm-hmm. On the game days, we were very fortunate that we had a lot of successful days, but we did have some bad games. And even it's always a constant self-improvement. I don't care about the score. What did we do to get better today? Were we better today? Mm-hmm. And it's up to you to answer that question. When it is a situation in a game and it's a loss, people always have a tendency to blame someone else. I'm going to blame the referees. I'm going to blame the coaches. I'm going to blame. The very first question I would ask my sons all the time is to focus on yourself. What could you have done to prevent the outcome? Is there anything more you could have done? And if there is, how do you fix it? Mm-hmm. I'm here to help you fix it, but look at yourself first before you look to anyone else. And I would say for the most part, they did a good job of accepting that. And I also had to learn, though, to be a better parent of an adolescent athlete, to where you just sit back and watch and let them make the adjustment. Yeah. Right. So, you can coach and you can talk about the process, and even as a parent, you're always like, how can I make this better for him? What can I do? sometimes the best thing you can do is just step back and watch.
Yeah.
Because when you watch, after a while, when they watch and then they get what they're doing and they focus and they do it, so much more rewarding than I told you so.
Yeah.
It really is. It is. It's amazing.
That is so true. So true. Okay, so I tell you what, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Jim Kenneally. All right, thanks for staying with us here on Navy Sports Central. Carl Darden here with you, and we are talking with Jim Kenneally. His son Ryan is an offensive lineman on the Navy Sprint football team. So, Jim, I wanted to share a quick story with you as a way of leading into the next question. I'm looking for a situation where Ryan really suffered a significant setback, whether it came from during a game or during a season, and how he bounced back from it long term. So to kind of preface that with a story, my son Ethan, we started him a little bit early in school. Okay, so when he entered the when he entered the ninth grade, he didn't turn 14 until like December, and consequently, now he did make the freshman basketball team. But think about this in terms of physical growth, he was in an eighth grader's body competing with these ninth graders, and then there's a handful of them that might have been started a little bit late. So now physically, he's probably about a year and a half behind them. So he had a pretty decent year, freshman year. He didn't start, but he got plenty of playing time. But then next year, when most of the other kids were starting to really grow, he hadn't really hit his growth spurt yet, because now, again, he's in a ninth grader's body trying to compete with folks that are looking to make the JV team. And unfortunately, he was not selected that year because he just didn't develop fast enough, physically primarily. And plus, that's probably the main thing. So when I went to pick him up from the day that he found out he got cut, he was bummed out. And I said, so, what's going on? He goes, well, I didn't make the team. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry to hear that. And then I was just kind of waiting. I didn't say anything. I was just kind of waiting to see how he'd respond. He says, yeah, I'm going to go out again next year. And that made me so happy, because I knew that it was just a matter of him not physically being as big as those other kids, because he hadn't hit his growth spurt yet. I mean, he was still, as a sophomore, he was still like 5'4" and, barely 120 pounds. Well, between sophomore and junior year, we worked our butts off. We went to Luke Air Force Base and shot baskets after baskets, did different drills and everything. And it was just a matter of just waiting for his growth spurt to kick in, because when it did, by the time he started, he came back junior year, and he was like almost 5'10" now. He'd put on 35 pounds, and he was dunking the basketball. And everybody just was completely blown away, So he makes the team, gets most improved player, and then he comes back his senior year and, ends up being most valuable player. So for me, it was the whole notion of just stepping back and letting him make that decision, like you were saying, right? And just saying, all right, let him decide what he wants to do. And then if he decides to go for it again, then just my job was just to be there to support him as much as possible. So with that in mind, I was wondering if you had something along those lines that you could share with us where Ryan was concerned.
Sure. I'm going to talk about the one sport that I've never coached, and I probably never will, and that's wrestling. Ryan has always been a bigger kid. When I say bigger, just thicker. If you see him now, he's 5'11", but his shoulders are very thick. He's very barrel-chested. You could tell he's an offensive lineman. But he's always been just kind of a husky kid. And so in football, he had always been able to kind of muscle people around, even though in fourth grade he was playing with the sixth graders because he had to, because it was a weight situation. So he learned how to, maneuver around the football field very well in terms of being a bigger kid. But he could never play basketball because he always fouled out, because, like you said, somebody like your son would run into him, and it's not like he was a very good basketball player. He's standing there in the middle, but your son would run into him, bounce off, and the referee would call a foul. So literally, Ryan played 2 seasons of basketball and said, why should I play basketball, Dad? I'm just going to foul out in the first half. So anyhow, we get to high school, and football season was over, and we're like, you have to do something in the winter. Let's try something. We knew he wasn't going to play basketball. We didn't have a hockey team, so he's like, I'll go out for wrestling. And his freshman year, he went out for wrestling, and I don't think he was ever on the mat. Anytime he had to wrestle off, he got beat. But he would come home. I'm like, how'd you do today? Bloody nose, cut eye, something crazy. Just never did anything from a wrestling perspective. So he wrestled sophomore year, wrestled in a couple sophomore meets, nothing spectacular, just wrestled on the JV team. And then his junior year, they wanted him to wrestle varsity. And he's wrestling at 220 pounds. He's wrestling the 220 weight class. And there was a tournament that was happening down in Lincoln, Illinois, outside of Champaign. It was right after Christmas. And he was so excited. He's like, Dad, I'm going to wrestle in the Lincoln tournament. There's all these all these people. This is going to be the best thing for me. I'm finally going to get to wrestle, finally going to get to be on the mat. And, of course, in our effort to support him, I'm like, that's awesome. I'll drive down, I'll watch, and we'll see how things turn out for you. Well, it's about a 3-hour drive from Chicago down to Lincoln, and I'm driving for 3 hours, and I'm like, oh, man, I'm just going to get here in time for his first match. And he had 4 matches that day.
Ooh.
So I got there, and I'm thinking it's time for his first match, and I see him walking outside the hallway, and I'm like, did you go yet? Yes, Dad. Okay, how'd you do? He was pretty tough. I think he got pinned in like 6 seconds.
Oh, bummer.
First match. Right? So I'm like, okay, that's okay. You have matches left, right? It's okay. Let's just keep wrestling. Next match, minute and a half. And I mean, it looks like he's wrestling against men. It's just crazy. You could tell people that these kids had wrestled for a while, minute and a half. So now I'm at 3 hours drive, 1 hour and 1 minute and 36 seconds of actual wrestling time. No. And then the third match, he was wrestling. Another kid had lost twice, and he wrestled, and he got to the third period and got pinned. So I think I was there for like a grand total of 10 minutes.
Right.
But, hey, man, the kid comes bouncing off the mat. He's like, man, I learned a lot today. And I'm like, you know what? That's the right attitude to have. I mean, if you have a lot and learn a lot and figure out what you need to do. The next year, he ended up, his senior year, he actually ended up going down to the state tournament as a, I think he wrestled 194, wrestled 194 then the next year.
Wow.
So just his ability to shake things off, to learn from his adversity and to take it as a learning experience and be better the next time around. I would say it makes me, I'm very proud of him for that, to be able to do those things. And that's a hard thing to say for somebody that goes to the Navy, right? We all are parents of these children who are exceptional, right?
Yeah.
But, the ability for them then to be around other exceptional athletes, other exceptional students, other exceptional people, and to constantly be able to learn from them, I think is something that we all should. I know I certainly take that into consideration when I'm talking to Ryan. And I mean, I'm so extremely impressed with everybody on the sprint football team. I mean, they're just exceptional people. The coaches are exceptional. The experience and the ability to learn from one another. I couldn't ask for anything more from an athletic experience in college. I played 2 sports in college. I played football and I played baseball. So I understand what it teaches, and I can see that it's clearly happening with my sons.
Right. Okay, just a couple other things, and these are just kind of like fun questions, I guess. I have a really close relationship with my son to the point where we really share different things with each other in terms of like, hey, Dad, you got to check out this movie, or, Ethan, I want to show you this TV show or whatever. Are there any, what are some of Ryan's favorites in terms of movies? For example, is he a Marvel guy? Is he a DC Comics guy? Does he care? What are some things that he likes to do in his spare time when he's not on the athletic field?
So he likes to listen to music. He's a very eclectic music guy. So I'm constantly asking him for new music that I can listen to. He really, really likes hanging out with his company mates. When he's watching TV, he loves Peaky Blinders. And from a movie. He likes the Marvel movies, but he's more of a music person than anything.
Got it. Okay. And the last question I'm going to ask you is this: let's not think about the athletics field or the wrestling mat or anything like that. And I know that, as parents, we always have these different moments that we remember with our kids that really make us feel good about ourselves. And it's really hard to put your finger on, the number one thing or the number two thing. But if you just kind of look at your top 10, just pull one from that, randomly, just give me an example of one of the times when you just really felt good about the fact that Ryan was your son that had nothing to do with football.
So does your son make you laugh?
Yeah, all the time. Usually when he's making wisecracks to my wife.
But does he purposely try to make you belly laugh?
I think sometimes he does it without thinking about it. No, so I would have to say no to that.
So Ryan he's so typically introspective.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't really say a lot. We have we have a phone call every Sunday. If we get 15 minutes of conversation out of him, it's a great thing. Mm-hmm. But when you sent me the question about the off the field, and I'm like, he's done some wonderful things, but I will say I kind of took this in a different tack, and I'm like, when is one time where he really amazed me? And this was his 8th grade year, mm-hmm. and he was participating in a program called Destination Imagination. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a STEM-based program. But that deals with how to present problems, how to work collegially to solve these problems. It's typically sponsored by 3M, but they also have this section called improvisation. Mm-hmm. And that's where you don't really have to do anything from a STEM perspective, but you have to improv, and they give you different things to be able to do. And Ryan and his friends, Ryan had participated in this program since 4th grade. Mm-hmm. They go down to the global competition, which is in Knoxville, Tennessee, or it used to be in Knoxville. I don't know where it is now. But this year they decided they're not going to do a STEM-based project. They're just going to do improvisation. Mm-hmm. They give them their topics to cover. Somebody's in the hospital. There's an angry television that can actually speak. There is... the nurses and doctors are coming in doing something, whatever. But every time the channel changed, and so 2 people were playing the TV, and Ryan was one of them, and he was the angry television. And I mean, there had to be 300 people in this auditorium, uh-huh. and he was the angry television. And I'm telling you, he made me laugh, and I still laugh when I think about the things that he was saying in terms of being an angry television, uh-huh. To the point where I'm constantly amazed by this kid's creativity mm-hmm. and ability to warm to the room. Right. So it's I would say that's my, if not near the top, but it's something that's just kind of a little out there. Yeah. But it makes him who he is, for sure.
And that's a great quality to have too when you think about it. In in life in general, the faster you can kind of get a sense for the group of people you're with and be able to connect with them. I mean, that's definitely going to be something that'll serve him well for sure.
He still has the same group of high school friends when he comes home. The rare time that he does have an opportunity to come home for 3 or 4 days. We call them the Pentaveret. There's the same group of guys that always go down in the basement, and they're always talking in these obscure movie line references, and they're all right. laughing at each other, and you don't have any idea what's going on in the conversation. But they're it's a good group for him to be around, as well as his Naval Academy classmates, for sure.
That sounds good. All right, Jim, listen, that's going to take us to the end of our conversation. And let me just say this. It was terrific having you on the show with me today, and I just can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here.
And again, I appreciate you having me on and having the ability to at least talk about sprint football for another 50 minutes here, or however long this podcast is. Mm-hmm. Season starts September 16th.
That's right.
September 23rd versus West Point beat Army.
That's right.
At home.
Yeah.
We're hoping to have more than 300 fans there.
Yeah, that's something I think I'm trying to remember. Last year I was able to see that. I don't know if ESPN Plus picked up the stream or what, but
it did.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah, so I'll definitely be checking that out for sure.
Awesome.
All right, Jim, thanks a lot. You take care of yourself, and we'll talk soon, okay?
All right, thanks.
Bye-bye. All right, we're going to step away for a short break. Then we'll return with our question of the day. So stay with us. We are back, and it's time to close things out with our question of the day. Before we get to it, let's check out some of the responses from our last question. Remember from our conversation a couple weeks back with Gina Lavatai, I asked, which of your sons or daughters' accomplishments as an athlete ranks among your top memories? And the choices were A, scoring their first touchdown, basket, goal, or getting their first base hit. B, coming through at crunch time with a game-winning touchdown, basketball, goal, or hit. C, earning team MVP honors. Or D, something else. And the choice that got the most votes was D, something else. 72% of you picked that option. One of the stories came from my classmate Melanie Doherty, whose daughter walked onto the Navy women's rowing team and earned a spot in the 1v8 boat. Not only that, she also rowed from the stroke seat, which is responsible for setting the pace for the crew throughout each race. A second story in that category came from Ross Wilhelm, another classmate, whose fearless daughter jumped off the 10-foot diving board at the age of 3. Now, the choice that got the second highest number of votes was B, coming through at crunch time. 22% of you went with that one. The coolest answer there came from Tim Royalty, whose son hit 2 buzzer beater shots in basketball during his junior season, and the second one ended up clinching the district title. Now, let's go ahead and get to this week's question. It goes back to the conversation I had with Jim, and it has to do with the miles we've all logged as parents when supporting our sons and daughters in sports. So here's the question. What's the farthest distance you've traveled in support of your athletes in their respective sport for a single game or event? And here's the choices. A is less than 100 miles. B is between 100 and 200 miles. C is between 200 and 300 miles. And D is more than 300 miles. You can respond on the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page or by emailing me at carld@navysportsnation.com. And in the comments section, you can add some details such as, what the event was, the city where it was held, all that stuff. So you guys can give that some thought, and we'll go ahead and find out who the biggest road warrior is. Okay, in our last episode, I mentioned the 2 athletes who we'll be tracking during the fall in our Midwatch segment. They are Ellie Abraham from the women's cross-country team and Keegan Shreves from the men's golf team. Right now, there isn't anything to report since the season for those 2 sports has not started yet. We can expect to see Ellie Abraham competing in the Salisbury Fall Classic, which will be on September 3rd, and Keegan Shreves will be teeing it up in the Mid's first match of the season against St. John's on September 10th and 11th. So it looks like I probably won't have anything to report on them until early next month, which will likely be episode 37, I think. That's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and remember to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. Once again, I'd like to thank Jim Kenneally for joining us today. It was really great getting his insight both as a coach and a parent. We have been getting a great response to our question of the day, so if you want to jump in on that, just go to the Navy Sports Nation group Facebook page. I will go ahead and pin it to the top so you won't miss it. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used in Navy Sports Central comes to you courtesy of Audio Jungle. This is a great site for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in the podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.